The first thing my neighbor said when I told him his new rental unit was sitting on my easement was, "That strip has been useless dirt for 20 years. Then he smiled, looked past me at the framed walls going up behind his house, and added, "Nobody's tearing down a $180,000 ADU because you want a shortcut to a drainage ditch." He was wrong about two things. First, it wasn't a shortcut. It was a 12-foot recorded access and drainage easement running 71 feet behind his lot, across the exact patch of land where his contractor had poured a concrete foundation. Second, by the time the city of San Diego found out what he had put on his permit plans, that rental unit had cost him more than $84,000 before a single tenant ever got a key. My name is Daniel Ruiz. I've lived in the Bay Park area of San Diego for 11 years. Quiet neighborhood, mostly older ranch homes, a few remodels. And lately, more ADUs than anybody can count. If you don't live in California, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, a backyard rental, a garage conversion, a small detached home behind the main house. Around here, people build them for parents, college kids, or extra income. I don't have a problem with any of that. My problem started when my neighbor decided the space behind his house was available because it had been ignored for years. Ignored does not mean abandoned. That distinction turned out to be expensive. My house sits on lot 17 of an old subdivision built in the late 1960s. Behind my backyard was a narrow drainage swale, a concrete catch basin, and a utility route that carried stormwater away from several homes on our block whenever San Diego got one of those heavy winter downpours. Most days, it looked like nothing, just gravel, vates, a few scrubby bushes, and a locked metal gate near the rear corner of my yard. But on the deed we received when we bought the house, there was a recorded easement placing. It gave my property and the city access across part of the neighboring lot to reach that drainage route for maintenance, inspection, and emergency clearing. The easement was 12 feet wide. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't make my lot bigger. It didn't give me the right to hang out in my neighbor's yard or tell him what color to paint his fence. It simply meant that nobody could permanently block that strip with a building, a wall, or anything else that prevented access to the drainage line. For 11 years, it never mattered. Then Nathan Cole bought the house next door. Nathan was 38, worked in commercial lending, and arrived in our neighborhood with a white Tesla, a gray baseball cap, and a renovation plan for every square foot of his property. He wasn't openly rude at first. He was the kind of guy who sounded friendly until you noticed every conversation was really about what he wanted from you. The first week he moved in, he told me he planned to modernize the whole place. I said, "Sounds like a lot of work." He said, "It'll be worth it. San Diego land doesn't stay cheap." That was true enough. Within a month, he removed the old lawn, replaced his driveway, painted the house charcoal gray, and hired a landscape company to install a sharp-looking wall around the front patio. None of it bothered me. Honestly, the place looked better. Then he started talking about an ADU. He told me he was planning a 2-bedroom unit in the backyard, maybe 700 square feet, with a separate entrance and a small patio. He said he had done the math and could bring in nearly $3,000 a month once it was finished. Passive income, he called it. I said, "As long as you can keep construction noise reasonable, it's your property." He nodded. Exactly. That conversation happened in March. By May, survey flags appeared behind his house. By June, a demolition crew tore out the old detached garage. By early July, there was a trench, rebar, stacks of lumber, and a portable toilet less than 40 feet from my bedroom window. Construction is construction. I didn't like the noise, but I wasn't going to be that neighbor. Then I saw where they were setting the forms for the foundation. The concrete forms cut straight across the narrow gravel strip behind Nathan's backyard. Not beside it. Across it. At first, I thought I might be mistaken. The old fence line between our homes was crooked. It had been built before either of us lived there. Most people assumed it marked the boundary, but the deed map showed the actual lot line angled slightly away from it. The easement followed that angle toward the rear drainage basin. I pulled out our closing documents. The easement was there. I found the old subdivision map from when we bought the house. It was there too, 12 feet wide, 71 feet long. Running through the exact area where Nathan's contractor had marked off the ADU foundation. The next morning, before the concrete truck arrived, I walked over. Nathan was in the backyard wearing clean work boots that had clearly never seen a work site before. His contractor, a man named Raul, was checking measurements with a tape measure. I said, "Nathan, can we talk for a second?" He looked up. "What's up?" I pointed to the forms. "I think this foundation is over the drainage easement behind our properties." Nathan glanced where I pointed, then looked back at me. "No, it isn't. I checked the deed map last night." "You mean that old paperwork from when you bought your place?" "Yes." He gave a short laugh. "Daniel, the title company checked all of this before I closed. The architect checked it. The city approved the plans. We're good." I said, "I'm not trying to stop your ADU. I'm saying that strip has to remain open. There's access to the drainage structure behind my yard." Nathan's contractor looked uncomfortable. He asked Nathan, "Do you have the easement exhibit in the permit packet?" Nathan waved him off. "It's not an issue," he said. Then he looked at me again. "That path hasn't been used since before I owned this house. You're not going to suddenly turn it into a legal emergency because you don't want a rental next door." I told him I didn't care if he rented the ADU. I cared that he was building across a recorded corridor that existed for a reason. Nathan's expression changed. Not angry exactly, more like annoyed that I had interrupted the version of the day he had planned. He said, "The city already signed off. If you have a problem, take it up with the city." That was fair in one way. So I did. I called the Development Services Department that afternoon. The woman who answered was polite but direct. She told me that property line and private easement disputes were usually civil matters. The city could not settle ownership arguments between neighbors just because one person claimed an easement existed. That made sense. I couldn't call the police either. There was no burglary, no assault, no criminal trespass in the usual sense. Nathan's construction crew was working on the property he owned. The problem was what his building footprint would do to a recorded right of access. The city employee told me that if the construction differed from approved plans, obstructed a public drainage easement, or involved false information in a permit application, that was different. But she couldn't tell me whether it did without a formal complaint and supporting documents. So I filed one. I attached the page from my deed. I attached the recorded subdivision map. I attached photos of the foundation forms. I attached the permit number posted on Nathan's construction fence. Then I waited. That part was harder than I expected. The concrete truck arrived the next morning anyway. I watched from my side yard as the crew poured a long, clean slab over ground that had been open for more than 5 decades. They smoothed it. They set anchor bolts. By the end of the day, the slab was drying in the sun like it had every right to be there. For 3 days, I barely slept. Not because I wanted a fight, because I kept imagining a winter storm, the catch basin backing up, water pushing toward our yard, and nobody being able to reach the drainage line without tearing through Nathan's new rental unit. My wife, Marisol, tried to keep me calm. She said, "Maybe the city will look at it and tell us we're wrong." I said, "Then at least we'll know." But the truth was, I didn't think we were wrong. I thought Nathan had made a mistake. A big one. And I could already see why he didn't want to admit it. By then, he had paid for demolition, grading, a new slab, framing materials, plumbing work, and permit fees. Every day the crew worked, made it harder for him to back up without losing money. That's the thing about a mistake made in concrete. The longer you let it dry, the more expensive honesty becomes. A week after I filed the complaint, I got a call from a city inspector named Marlene Foster. She said she had reviewed the permit file and wanted to visit the site. Not the next day. Not within an hour. 5 business days later. That was frustrating. But it was real life. City inspectors don't appear through a cloud of smoke the moment someone calls. They have routes, files, schedules, and more complaints than time. Marlene asked me to have my documents ready. The night before her inspection, Nathan came to my front door. He didn't knock hard. He knocked like he expected me to be waiting. I opened the door, and he stood there holding a folded set of plans. "You reported my project?" he said. "Yes." "You could have talked to me." "I did talk to you." He let out a breath through his nose. "You brought up an old map?" "I told you the project was permitted. I asked you to check it before you poured concrete. You're trying to derail a project that I've already spent serious money on. I'm trying to keep a recorded access easement from being blocked." Nathan unfolded the plans across my porch railing. He pointed to a line near the edge of the ADU footprint. "See this? Utility area? It's not under the building." I looked closely. The site plan showed a narrow dashed line marked utility corridor, but it was drawn along the far edge of his yard, near the new fence. That wasn't where the easement appeared on the old subdivision map. It was shifted almost 7 feet west. I looked up at him. "Who gave your architect this location?" Nathan's face tightened. "The survey." "Can I see it?" "It's in the permit file." "Then the inspector will see it." He folded the plans quickly. Then he said the sentence that made everything crystal clear. "Look, Danielle, you're not losing access to anything you use. You're just scared a renter will be looking into your backyard." That wasn't true. The ADU windows faced away from us, and I had never complained about privacy. But it told me what Nathan believed. He believed this was about personal preference. He didn't understand that easements exist precisely because they matter before an emergency happens. I said, "If the plans are right, the inspector will confirm it. If they're wrong, you need to know now." Nathan stared at me for a moment. Then he said, "You'll regret turning this into a problem." And he walked away. I didn't regret filing the complaint. But I did realize I needed somebody who understood how to read old property records better than I did. That was when Marisol called Anna Reyes. Anna had helped our cousin in Riverside with an HOA fight a few months earlier. She wasn't an attorney, and she never pretended to be, but she knew how to pull a thread in a stack of documents until the whole thing made sense. She came down to San Diego the weekend before the inspection. She arrived with a canvas tote bag, a portable scanner, and enough coffee for all 3 of us. I spread the deed, subdivision map, permit printout, and photos across our dining table. Anna studied them quietly. Then she asked one question. "Where did Nathan's architect get the survey?" I said, "He says it's in the permit file." Anna nodded. "Then that's where we start." She compared the legal description in my deed to the map. Then she compared both to the small site plan Nathan had shown me. After about 20 minutes, she sat back. "This isn't just a disagreement over where a path should be," she said. "What is it?" She tapped the map with one fingernail. "His permit plan shows the easement in the wrong place." And that was when I understood why Nathan had been so confident. He didn't think he was building over my access. He thought a line on a recent plan had erased a line recorded decades earlier. But Anna kept reading. Then she found something that made the whole situation worse. The ADU permit application did not simply show the easement in the wrong spot. It included a signed declaration stating that the proposed building would not obstruct any recorded public utility, drainage, or access easement. Nathan had saw. Marlene Foster arrived at 9:40 on a Wednesday morning. By then, the ADU had framing up on all 4 sides. The roof trusses were stacked in the driveway. Plumbing lines had been run through the slab. A subcontractor was measuring for windows. Nathan's place looked less like a backyard and more like a small construction site with a house attached to it. Marlene parked in front, clipped her city badge to her shirt, and walked up with a tablet in one hand. She was probably in her 50s, wore work boots, and had the kind of calm expression that made it clear she had heard every excuse a property owner could invent. Nathan met her at the gate. He was polite at first. "Morning." I understand there's a neighbor complaint. Marlene said, I'm here to verify the approved site plan and review a reported drainage access conflict. He nodded. It's a misunderstanding. I stood on my side of the fence with Anna. We didn't interrupt. Marlene asked Nathan for the approved plans. He handed them over. Then she walked around the foundation, measuring from fixed points on the property. She checked the rear line, the side setback, the location of the drainage structure, and the dimensions shown on the plan. After about 15 minutes, she asked a contractor to stop work near the rear wall. Nathan noticed immediately. Is there a problem? He asked. Marlene looked down at the tablet. Where is the recorded easement shown in your survey package? Nathan pointed to the same dashed line he had shown me on my porch. There. Marlene looked at it. Then she asked, who prepared this exhibit? Coastal Design Group. They handled the plans. Did they perform a boundary survey? I assume so. That's not what I asked. Nathan hesitated. I don't know. My architect handled it. Marlene said, this line is labeled Utility Corridor. The complaint materials show a recorded 12-foot drainage and access easement in a different location. I need to compare the permit exhibit to the recorded map. Nathan's voice changed. You're taking his word over mine? No, she said. I'm comparing documents. That was one of the best things anyone said during the entire mess. Not taking sides. Comparing documents. Marlene spent another 20 minutes walking the site. Then she asked if she could see the rear drainage access. I opened the gate from my yard and showed her the catch basin, the concrete swale, and the narrow approach that had once continued behind Nathan's lot. She looked at the new foundation wall. Then she looked back at the map. Your structure is sitting within the reported corridor, she said. Nathan folded his arms. Reported corridor. Yes. I still need the city survey records and the approved grading file before I make a final finding. He said, so I can keep building? Marlene looked at the framing crew. Not in this area. She issued a partial stop work notice that afternoon. It did not shut down every part of Nathan's property. The main house work could continue. Interior planning could continue. But no additional construction was allowed on the ADU foundation and rear wall until the city verified the easement location and whether the approved plan matched the recorded conditions. Nathan was furious. He wasn't shouting at the inspector. He was too smart for that. But after she left, he came straight to my fence. You happy now? He said. I said, I didn't ask the city to stop your project. I asked them to verify the easement. You got what you wanted. I want the access kept open. You want to ruin my build because you don't like change. Anna stepped closer to the fence. Nathan, if the record is wrong, this gets fixed with the city. If the permit plan is wrong, you need to know before you put a roof on it. He looked at her. And you are? Anna rages. Are you a lawyer? No. Then stop acting like one. Anna didn't blink. I'm not telling you what the law is. I'm telling you, your permit application says you didn't obstruct a recorded easement. The city is checking whether that statement is true. Nathan pointed at the partly framed ADU. I've got 18 guys lined up on this job. I have a lender. I have a tenant ready to sign. You think the city is going to make me tear this down because of a line on an ancient map? Anna said, that depends on where the line actually is. He shook his head and walked away. That night, Marisol asked me if we should offer to compromise. I understood why she asked. Living next to someone in a fight is exhausting. Every time a truck pulled up, every time we heard a hammer, every time Nathan passed our house without looking over, it felt like the whole street had become tense. But compromise only works when both people are willing to acknowledge reality. I told her, I can't agree to let him block the easement. If the drainage backs up later, the city won't care that I wanted to keep peace with my neighbor. Anna agreed. She said, you can offer him a reasonable solution, but don't offer him permission to build across something you don't have the right to waive by yourself. That was an important point. The easement wasn't just for me. The recorded map granted rights to Lot 17 and reserved a drainage access corridor connected to city infrastructure, even if I wanted to sign a note saying, "Fine, build there." I couldn't erase a city drainage easement with a handshake. 2 days later, Anna and I went to the county recorder's office. We requested the original subdivision plat, the easement dedication, and any later recorded modifications. Most property fights get messy because people rely on what they remember. Fences move. Shrubs grow. Owners change. But recorded documents sit there quietly for decades. The original plat was from 1968. It showed our lots before the houses were even built. There was the 12-foot strip. It began at the rear drainage basin, angled across the western portion of Nathan's lot, and connected to the street-side utility access. The plat had a note in small print that neither of us had noticed before. Drainage and maintenance access easement. No permanent structures permitted. Anna read it out loud. Then she found a second document from 1974. It showed that a stormwater improvement project had added a maintenance obligation for the city after repeated flooding in the area. The easement had not disappeared. It had not expired. It had not been abandoned. It had been recorded, preserved, and referenced in public documents for more than 50 years. I asked Anna why Nathan's permit plan showed it somewhere else. She said, "There are a few possibilities. His architect may have been given a bad sketch, somebody may have used a fence line instead of a title survey, or somebody may have shifted it because the real location made the ADU impossible. Which one do you think it is?" Anna closed the folder. I don't guess when documents can answer it. So we requested the permit file. California public record requests are not magic. You don't send an email at lunch and get a binder by dinner. We submitted the request, waited, followed up, and eventually received the non-confidential portions of the ADU application. The file explained a lot. Nathan had hired an architect named Evan Sloan, who had prepared the ADU plans based on a site information package supplied by Nathan. The package contained property photos, a rough backyard sketch, and a one-page graphic labeled Existing Utility Easement. That graphic was not a licensed boundary survey. It had no surveyor's stamp, no bearings, no legal description, no reference to the 1968 subdivision plat, and the dashed line showing the easement had been drawn along the fence. The problem was, the old fence was not on the actual easement line. It was 7 feet away from it. I stared at the graphic for a long time. "Did Nathan draw this?" I asked. Anna looked closely. "We don't know. But he certified that the information submitted with the permit was accurate." Then she found something else. Nathan's original ADU concept had been larger. 720 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, private entrance, patio, laundry closet. The architect's notes showed that the first layout had been rejected internally because it encroached into the utility area shown on Nathan's own sketch, so the design had been shifted, but it was shifted based on the wrong line. That meant the fix had only moved the ADU farther into the real easement. The city inspector called the next week. She had reviewed the original plat and the drainage easement dedication. She also confirmed that the site plan submitted with Nathan's permit did not accurately show the recorded corridor. The permit cannot authorize obstruction of a dedicated drainage easement. Marlene said, I asked what happened next. She explained that the partial stop work order would remain. The city would require a corrected site survey from a licensed land surveyor. Nathan would need to submit revised plans. Depending on the survey results, the ADU footprint might need significant revision or removal. Can he keep renting it once it's finished? I asked. Not without final approvals and a certificate of occupancy, she said. And he can't get those while the stop work order is unresolved. That was the moment Nathan's rental income stopped before it ever started. He had already posted mock-up photos online. I knew because Marisol found the listing accidentally while looking for a place for her cousin. Newly built Bay Park ADU. It said, expected availability this fall. Private modern 2-bedroom. San Mayren. $250 monthly. The rental listing had a waiting list. Nathan had told a potential tenant that the unit would be ready by October. But October came and went, with the walls still framed and covered in weather wrap. No roof. No windows. No tonneau. No income. He removed the listing after the city made him take it down. For a while, it looked like he might finally accept the situation. He hired a licensed surveyor named Peter Sue. Peter came out with tripods, instruments, orange paint, and a stack of old documents. He spent 2 days measuring the lot, locating the original monuments, and comparing his field work against the recorded plat. I watched from my yard without saying anything. At the end of the second day, Peter walked over to Nathan. They stood beside the half-built ADU for several minutes. Nathan kept gesturing at the fence. Peter kept shaking his head. Later, Peter came to my gate. He said, "Mr. Ruiz, I can't discuss my client's work in detail, but your easement location is consistent with the recorded plat." I said, "Does the foundation cross it?" He looked back at the ADU. "Yes. Not by a few inches. Not by a corner. The rear third of the foundation, one long wall, and part of the planned patio all occupied the 12-foot easement." The city gave Nathan 30 days to submit a correction plan. That should have been the point where he changed course. He could have redesigned the ADU into a smaller studio. He could have converted part of his garage. He could have shifted the structure toward his driveway, though it would have meant giving up the private patio and second bedroom that made the rental profitable. It would have cost him money, but it would have saved him from making the problem worse. Instead, Nathan sent us a letter through an attorney. The letter said he disputed the scope and validity of the easement. It claimed the corridor had not been used by my family, and it suggested that my complaint was motivated by hostility toward residential density. It also offered us $5,000 if we would sign an agreement giving him limited permission to maintain the ADU where it was. $5,000 for permanent blockage of an access and drainage corridor tied to my property and city infrastructure. Anna read the letter, then looked at me. "He's betting you'll see $5,000 and get tired." I was tired, but I wasn't confused. I told Rachel Vaughn, the attorney Anna had recommended, that I wanted to respond. Rachel wrote a short letter back. It said I had no authority to release the city's drainage rights. It said the property records showed no termination of the easement. It said any construction blocking the easement was Nathan's responsibility to correct. And it asked Nathan to stop contacting us directly about a private payoff. The next day, he came to my front door anyway. He stood there with no attorney, no plans, no confidence left in his voice, just anger. "You could have taken the money," he said. I said, "I can't sell you something that isn't mine alone to sell. You could have stayed out of it. You built across a recorded easement?" He looked past me into my house. "You know what this is really about? You don't like that I'm making money from my property." I almost laughed, because it was so far from the truth. I said, "Nathan, I work 6 days a week half the time. I don't care how you make money. But you don't get to make it by blocking the only access to drainage infrastructure behind my house." He pointed toward his backyard. "You're going to cost me everything." I said, "No. The paperwork you signed did that." That was the moment I knew exactly what we were going to do. We were done trying to persuade him. Anna had found the deed language. The county map had confirmed it. The city had verified the permit discrepancy. The licensed survey had located the easement. Now the only question was whether Nathan would remove the ADU himself or wait for the city to make the decision for him. And if you're still with me, subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice. Around here, the paperwork always has the final word, but only after somebody has the patience to find it. The 30-day correction deadline came and went. Nathan did submit revised plans, but they were not a real fix. His first revision tried to treat the easement as a landscaped passage. The new drawing removed the patio and showed a narrow gravel strip along the rear of the ADU, but the foundation wall stayed where it was. The plan effectively asked the city to accept an 8-foot wide gap around a building sitting inside a 12-foot no-build corridor. The city rejected it. Then he submitted a second revision. This one proposed a raised metal walkway over the drainage route, as if a walkway could somehow make a concrete foundation disappear underneath it. The city rejected that too. Marlene's letter was clear. The structure had to be removed from the recorded easement, not decorated, not renamed, not hidden behind landscaping. Removed. Nathan's attorney pushed back. They argued that the city had approved the initial permit and should bear responsibility for the error. The city responded that a permit approval did not extinguish recorded property restrictions or authorize building over a dedicated drainage easement. The applicant had a duty to provide accurate site information, and the permit file itself contained Nathan's signed statement that the project would not obstruct any recorded access or drainage corridor. That was the part Nathan could not talk around. The permit had not created the easement problem. The permit application had misrepresented it. While the lawyers exchanged letters, the half-built ADU sat behind Nathan's house through the wettest part of the winter. The framing got covered in tarps. The lumber warped in places. A few shingles from the temporary protection blew into my yard during a storm. Nathan hired workers twice to secure the exposed structure, then fired them both when they told him the same thing. There was no point finishing anything until the city approved a lawful redesign. One morning, I saw him standing alone in the backyard, looking at the structure. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the concrete truck, the $5,000 payoff offer, the letter accusing us of being hostile to residential density, and the way he had told me the easement was useless dirt. He had every opportunity to pause before the foundation was poured. He just did not want to lose a month of construction or a few hundred square feet of rentable space. Now he was losing much more. The city scheduled a compliance hearing for late January. Nathan attended with his attorney, his architect, his surveyor, and a contractor who had prepared demolition estimates. I attended with Marisol, Anna, and Rachel. The hearing was held in a plain city conference room, not a courtroom. There was no dramatic jury, no judge slamming a gavel, just officials, plans, photographs, inspection reports, and a long table full of people who had spent months trying to establish one basic fact. Where was the easement? The city's answer was simple: right under Nathan's ADU. Marlene presented the permit timeline. She showed the original site information graphic, the later survey, the subdivision plat, and the city drainage records. Nathan's attorney argued that the error came from the design team. The architect responded that he relied on the site information the owner had provided. Nathan looked at the architect like he had betrayed him. The architect looked exhausted. Then the city official asked Nathan directly whether he had reviewed and signed the permit declaration, stating that no recorded easement would be blocked. Nathan said, "I signed what I was given by my architect." The official asked, "Did you read it?" Nathan paused. Nobody moved. Finally, he said, "I trusted the professionals I hired." Anna leaned toward me and whispered, "That's not the same as reading what you sign." The city gave Nathan a final compliance order. He had 60 days to remove the portions of the structure occupying the easement, submit a revised ADU design, and restore clear access to the drainage corridor. If he failed to do so, escalating enforcement penalties could follow, and the city could pursue further action to correct the obstruction. No one cheered, not even me. Because demolition is not entertaining when you are standing 10 feet away from the person who has to pay for it. But it was necessary. Nathan had one last chance to avoid the worst outcome. He could comply. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then a dumpster appeared in his driveway. A demolition crew arrived the following Monday. The work took 4 days. First, they removed the framing along the rear and west sides of the ADU. Then they cut through the concrete slab in long sections. The sound of the saw was brutal. It started at 8 in the morning and went until late afternoon. I stayed inside most of the first day. I didn't want Nathan to think I was enjoying it, but I heard every cut, every chunk of concrete lifted by the excavator, every steel anchor pulled from the ground. By the third day, the rear third of the building was gone. By the fourth, There was an open 12-foot corridor again, marked by fresh orange stakes and small metal survey monuments set into the ground. The city required official markers at key points along the easement so future owners could not pretend they didn't know where it was. Peta Hazu, the surveyor, came back to install them. He placed one near the front access point, one beside the drainage basin, and two along the line behind Nathan's property. Each marker had a cap stamped with his survey license information. For the first time since all of this began, you could stand behind my yard and see a clear route from the street side access to the drainage structure. Nothing fancy. Just open ground, where open ground was legally required. Nathan's final cost was more than $84. Ling ling ling. That number came from the documents filed during the compliance process, and the contractor estimates Nathan submitted while trying to negotiate more time, nearly $26. 000 went to demolition and disposal. Another $18. $500 went to redesigning the ADU, paying for a new engineered foundation layout, and resubmitting plans. More than $11. 000 went to survey work, consultant fees, and additional permit review. He paid carrying costs and interest on the construction loan while the project sat unfinished. And he lost months of projected rental income because the ADU could not receive final approval or a certificate of occupancy. The new version of the ADU was smaller, 1 bedroom instead of 2, 512 square feet instead of 720. No private rear patio. No separate side entrance through the area he had originally planned to use. It could still be rented legally once finished. The city did not take that right away from him. He just had to build a unit that respected the recorded conditions of the lot. I think that mattered. This was never about destroying his investment once. It was about stopping him from making money by building over rights that belonged to other people. The redesigned ADU finally passed inspection 9 months after Nathan had expected it to be finished. By then, rental prices had softened a little. The tenant who had been ready to sign in October had found another place. The waiting list was gone. Nathan eventually rented the smaller unit for $2, $250 a month. That was still decent money, but it was $1,000 less than the number he had bragged about during his first backyard conversation with me. And every month he collected that rent. He had to look at the 4 survey monuments beside the unit, little brass-capped reminders that a fence line is not a deed. A permit sketch is not a recorded plat. And a person does not get to erase an easement by treating it like an inconvenience. As for Anna, she never took credit for any of it. When I thanked her, she said, "You did the hard part. You stayed calm long enough to make the records matter." I told her I had not always felt calm. She smiled. Calm doesn't mean you aren't angry. It means you don't let the angry person make your decisions for you. That stayed with me. Because I had been angry. I was angry when Nathan dismissed the easement as useless dirt. I was angry when he implied I was jealous of his rental income. I was angry when he tried to offer us $5,000 for a problem that could have flooded our yard or blocked maintenance access for years. But anger would not have located the easement. A licensed surveyor did that. Anger would not have stopped the construction. The permit file did that. Anger would not have forced Nathan to remove the illegal portion of the ADU. The recorded plat, the city's stop work order, and his own signed declaration did that. A few months after the new ADU was rented, San Diego got one of those sudden hard rains that turns dry streets into rivers for an hour. Water moved fast through the drainage swale behind our house, the catch basin filled with leaves and debris. A city maintenance crew came out the next morning, unlocked the access gate, and used the open corridor beside Nathan's property to reach it. They cleared the blockage in less than 40 minutes. I stood in my backyard and watched them work. Nathan was outside too. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The crew's truck drove away. The drainage route was clear. My backyard was dry. And the easement that Nathan had called useless had done exactly what it was supposed to do. I don't know whether Nathan learned the lesson because he understood it or because it cost him too much not to. Maybe it doesn't matter. Some people only recognize a boundary after they run into it. But a boundary is still a boundary, even when it is hidden beneath weeds, even when nobody has needed it for 20 years. even when a new foundation would be more profitable if it didn't exist. I didn't want Nathan's rental income. I didn't want his house. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the access that had been recorded with my property long before either of us moved onto that street. In the end, that was enough. If your neighbor built across a recorded easement and offered you money to stay quiet, what would you do first? Take the deal. Call the city. Or hire a surveyor? Some people may say Nathan should have been allowed to keep the structure if he paid enough. Others will say an easement is there for a reason, especially when drainage and safety are involved. Tell me where you draw the line in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where the paperwork beats the power trip, subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice. Around here, the truth is usually buried in a deed, a permit file, or an old map, and Anna knows exactly where to look. This video is a fictionalized, dramatized storytelling narrative based on real-life HOA, property, permit, and neighbor conflict themes. Names, characters, location, documents, events, and outcomes may be invented or reconstructed for entertainment. This content is not legal, financial, real estate, or professional advice. Laws and local regulations vary. Consult a qualified professional about your own situation